Welcome everybody again. My name is Marissa Barrera. I'm a social worker with the Children's Immigration Law Academy, or better known as CILA. Please say hello in the chat and tell us your name of your organization, and what part of the US are you joining us from. But before getting started, I would like to discuss some housekeeping matters. This is an hour-long webinar. Please enter your questions in the Q&A box rather than the chat box. We'll try to address any questions as we go along. However, we'll also have some time at the end for questions. But if for some reason we're not able to answer your question here, we'll provide that answer by email or at a later time. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our website at a later time. We will be providing a copy of the PowerPoint and some resources for all of you. We'll be offering 1 credit unit of continuing education for social workers, professional counselors, and marriage and family therapists who attend the live portion of this webinar. Following the webinar, we'll be providing a survey for feedback and CEU requests. If you want to get CEUs or a letter of attendance, please complete that. Some of you are familiar with CILA's work, but for those who are not, let me tell you a little bit about CILA. We are a project of the American Bar Association Commission of Immigration, located in Houston, Texas. We are a legal and social service resource center. We are a capacity building organization. And here at CILA, we believe that every child should have representation. In Texas, we provide technical assistance regarding case-specific questions relating to children and youth with immigration cases. We offer 5 Texas-specific working groups and a national working group to provide a space for advocates to collaborate. We also provide training and written resources. The reason for this webinar: we know there is growing evidence that the impact of directly supporting others through experience of trauma can lead not only to compassion fatigue and burnout, but to secondary traumatic stress. The purpose of this webinar is to support professionals like you, social workers, social service providers, mental health providers, legal service providers, attorneys, and others who work directly with traumatized unaccompanied children. I would like to introduce both of our speakers for today, Kasey and Megan. They are both part of the Alliance Wellness Clinic, where they support the emotional care, behavioral health, and mental health needs of Houston area residents, including individuals who arrive as refugees and immigrants. Kasey Wolff is a supervising counselor at the Alliance Wellness Clinic. She's a licensed professional counselor and a fully trained EMDR therapist. She works with teenagers and adults who have experienced trauma and are dealing with anxiety and depression. Kasey earned her undergrad degree in psychology at Texas A&M University in 2015, earned her master's degree in counseling at the University of Houston in 2018. Megan Heath has been a counseling student intern at the Alliance since June 2021. She currently is attending the University of Houston, where she will graduate in May of 2022. Before her training as a mental health counselor, Megan worked as a case manager for 4 years, working closely with survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and with the homeless population in Houston. Welcome, Kasey and Megan. Thank you for agreeing to speak to us about such an important topic. And now, Kasey and Megan.
Thanks for that great introduction, Marissa. Really appreciate it. So as Marissa said, my name is Kasey Wolff, and I have Megan joining me here while she pulls up the PowerPoint. And we're going to be talking about like work-related stress, secondary trauma, compassion fatigue, and burnout. And I'm going to go ahead and let Megan kick us off, and then I'll be back on here towards the end.
Alrighty. Okay, so let's get started. So yes, our focus on this presentation today is going to be those work-related stressors. And in particular, we're going to focus on compassion fatigue, burnout, and then secondary traumatic stress. All right, so just to provide like a roadmap of what we're going to spend our hour talking about, we're going to start off with a brief history of burnout, how the term kind of came to be known, what it is today. We're going to explain the difference between burnout, compassion fatigue, and secondary traumatic stress. So usually these terms are kind of synonymous with each other. They're used synonymously with each other. But we're going to explain kind of the subtle differences between them. And then we're going to then kind of shift gears and to discuss how these can impact your personal and professional life. And then finally, we're going to wrap up with, the most important part of the presentation. What do you do if you're noticing these signs and symptoms in your life of burnout or just those work-related stress? All right, so we're going to get started with the history of burnout. So the term burnout in relation to employment and mental health was first coined by Freudenberger in 1974 in the Journal of Social Issues. So a little bit of history about Freudenberger. He worked in a free clinic in the late 1960s. So free refers to free from judgment and risk from legal persecution. So the people who kind of visited this free clinic were drug abusers, hippies, minorities, and all others who are considered outsiders or rejected from society or marginalized in any way. So at that time, the term burned out was really referring to drug addicts. And so it was kind of society saying it was their state of exhaustion. They were seen as emptied out, metaphorically. And then it was just referring to their desperation, to get their next high, basically. So whenever Freudenberger was working in this free clinic, he actually would notice that the clinic staff was exhibiting similar signs of this exhaustion and desperation that their patients were experiencing as well. And so this really spurred the curiosity for Freudenberger. So why was this becoming such a common phenomenon amongst the free clinic workers? So that really kind of drove his research. So he goes on, in the Journal of Social Issues to refer to burnout as a state of exhaustion from having to deal with excessive demands that taxed one's energy, strength, or available resources. So this might sound familiar because it's not too different than the term that we, think of today, or the definition that we think of today when we think of burnout. So I kind of want to give you a picture of the social influences in the 1950s and 60s that kind of created or was like in response to the environment that Freudenberger was doing his research in. So the war on poverty introduced by LBJ's administration really encouraged, idealistic youngsters coming from college and, wanting to join the social service or other helping professions to help those that were marginalized. And then unfortunately, they would eventually run into brick walls or red tape in their quest to help these members of society. And so after expending so much of themselves for this noble cause, and then kind of running into those brick walls, collectively there was a group experience of burnout and disillusionment. And so another thing, the human service sector really was once a small business venture that was kind of born of a do-good attitude or just wanting to help your fellow man. But in the 1960s, this kind of shifted into a more bureaucratic process, which really morphed organizations to have more federal and or state oversight. And so that did impact as well. And then, of course, culturally, doctors, teachers, social workers, just to name a few professions, really kind of fell from grace, so to speak, or they fell from being seen as having absolute authority in their field. Like whether that's right or wrong, that's just how the culture was moving at that time. And so really what this meant is that there was more of a give and take in the client or patient and professional relationship. So, which oftentimes demanded more compassion on behalf of the professional, more listening, more flexibility. And so again, whether that's, right or wrong is besides the point. Really what it did is that it was more taxing on the professional to, be involved in these helping professions. And then lastly, I just wrote here, burnout, is this a disease of modernity? Is this simply a response to our fast-paced society, or is it a response to the internet coming up, or what have you? Well, psychological burnout was actually a phenomenon even in William Shakespeare in 1599. He wrote about being burnt out, one of his characters, and that term was used in a psychological sense, by William Shakespeare even back then. And there's even some writings in the Bible referring to psychological burnout. So really burnout has transformed, the term has transformed to once referring to drug addicts and their state of emptiness, desperation, and having virtually nothing, to a term that now it can be seen as an individual who maybe wants it all, perhaps self-sacrificing themselves for power, success, or knowledge. So it has really morphed into a term that it once referred to many different walks of life. It could refer to someone who is burnt out from giving too much love, or a stay-at-home mother who is burnt out caring for her children, to really now it focuses on occupational burnout. Okay, so that just was a brief history of kind of how the term burnout evolved. And so I really like this quote. So as a practicing psychoanalyst, I have come to realize that people, as well as buildings, sometimes burn out. Under the strain of living in our complex world, their inner resources are consumed as if by fire, leaving a great emptiness inside, although their outer shells may be more or less unchanged. Only if you venture inside will you be struck by the full force of the desolation. So this is kind of coming back to that theme that we've heard so far about burnt out and that feeling of emptiness inside. So this is referring to an empty house inside, or feeling empty inside mentally. And so this was written by another researcher in the field of occupational burnout. Okay, so now let's get into talking about compassion fatigue, burnout, and then secondary traumatic stress. So let's go over, there we go. All right, so we're gonna get started with, on the left, compassion fatigue. So compassion fatigue can also be colloquially referred to as vicarious trauma. So this fatigue comes from repeated exposure to clients in crisis states. So clients coming to you with pain and with suffering, okay? So hearing the stories day in and day out of clients that have endured these traumatic events can really take a toll on the listener's mental health, even if the client is out of that situation, appears okay in your office, you're able to help them. Still, listening to their stories takes a toll on the listener's mental health, especially repeated day in, day out, okay? So professionals who listen to these types of stories can experience hopelessness, a decrease in pleasure from activities maybe they once found pleasurable, persistent stress and anxiety, and then a pervasive negative attitude. So these professionals are really experiencing these symptoms because they're in a state of preoccupation with the client's traumas. So they are focusing a lot on the client's traumas. And it's important to remember that compassion fatigue is stemming from the nature of a professional's work. So we really can't control the clients or patients who come into our office and what kind of stories or what kind of traumas they might share with us. And so this is just almost like a work hazard, we don't know what kind of stories that they're going to come in with. It's just the nature of helping others. So that goes to say, those who listen to client or patient stories, such as lawyers, doctors, police, people, counselors, social workers, all of these positions are at risk for compassion fatigue. And then especially if you work in a high risk or work with high risk populations like domestic violence victims, children who, suffered child abuse, refugees, just to name a few. So that's compassion fatigue kind of in a nutshell. And of note is that severe levels of this compassion fatigue can lead to secondary traumatic stress, which we'll talk about now. So secondary traumatic stress is the state of, the definition, it is the state of intense emotional duress that results from when an individual hears about the firsthand trauma experience of another. So again, this is similar to compassion fatigue, is that it's revolving around the nature of helping professionals work. So this emotional toll it has on the professional at this very severe level can impact functioning and diminish the professional's quality of life. So when you're wanting to kind of notice signs and symptoms of secondary traumatic stress, there's really 4 domains that you want to keep an eye out for, which are intrusion, hyperarousal, avoidance, and dissociation, which I'll get into a few of that now. So intrusion is going to refer to the reoccurring thoughts, flashbacks, nightmares, experiencing psychological distress when remembering the story, or experiencing physiological response when remembering or being reminded of the trauma event. So your heart's beating faster, your stomach gets in a knot, maybe you start clenching your hands, what have you, but that intrusion is a sign or symptom of secondary traumatic stress. The next one is going to be hyperarousal. So that is difficulty, or that looks like difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep. It can look like an increased startle response. It can look like being hypervigilant, around yourself. An increase of irritability, difficulty concentrating. Those are a few symptoms of hyperarousal. And so one thing to note is that this is going to look different for everyone because everyone's baseline is different on these states of focus. However, if you do notice colleagues or friends or family member kind of pointing this out about you, you seem irritable or you seem like you startle easily nowadays, maybe that's time to, kind of take a step back and internally assess yourself, is something more going on? Okay, and so the next one is going to be avoidance. So this is exactly what it sounds like. Avoidance is avoiding people, places, or things that remind you of the traumatic event. It can also look like avoiding thoughts or feelings. So this could potentially lead into self-medicating with drugs or alcohol, or it can even look like avoiding writing a case note because you don't want to talk about it, or avoid staffing the client with others because you don't want to talk about it. Avoiding people, places, or things, avoiding scheduling appointments with the client, or wanting to take off work more than usual. Those are some signs of avoidance. Okay, and so another sign is an out of the ordinary inability to recall important aspects of the trauma. So as lawyers, as social workers, as counselors, we are really, part of our job is to be actively listening to our clients' stories, whether that's to create a treatment plan or whether to craft your defense or argument. We are deeply engaged in these stories. And so an inability to recall these important, parts of their trauma story or their story in general can definitely impact our work. So another sign of avoidance, feeling withdrawn and pessimistic about your future. So it's like you're disengaging from your life, almost as if there is no point. And experiencing a restricted range of feelings. So if you've ever felt so sad or helpless in a situation, but you can't even cry, you're just stone-faced. Okay, and so the last one we're going to talk about is disassociation. So that is the feeling that you or the things around you are not real. So this can be like you feel like you're in a dream, or you feel like you're in a fog or a haze. Those are common ways of people describing it. People may experience, of course, memory disturbances in this kind of state. People can be mentally absorbed into whatever they're doing, not aware of anything going on around them, or they can be completely distracted from whatever they're doing, and they're just, in the other world, making it difficult to focus. All right, and so we're going to end off with burnout. So burnout, defined, is a type of work-related strain that stems from repeated exposure to stressful circumstances that result in emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and reduced personal accomplishment. So burnout is unique because it's not the nature of the work, it's the work environment. So burnout is a result of the work environment, such as coworkers having heavy job duties, if there's an issue with your supervisor, if there's a poor work culture, a lack of resources to do one's job, long hours, things like that, that all creates maybe a toxic work environment that can lead to burnout. So this is different than the other two because burnout is describing the impact of the workplace in particular on an individual, not necessarily the nature of the work, but the workplace itself. Okay. All right, so now we're going to talk about how employment or job-related stress, like the ones I've just described, can impact your personal life. So one may assume that work-related stress is only going to impact you at work or impact your work life, but that is not the case. It is very, very easy to spill over into one's personal life. And that makes it all the more important to address this as soon as you start recognizing the symptoms in yourself. So first point, it can deteriorate personal relationships. So your relationships may suffer. You might not be as open to forming relationships with people outside of work, or you might not be as open to maintaining, working on your relationships that you already have with people. So you might reason with yourself that you are so exhausted at the end of the day that you have nothing left to give to children, your spouse, yourself, for self-care. You might reason that, since all your energy is given to work, you just don't have any more energy at the end of the day. So this can zap your energy, leaving you an empty shell at the end of the day with very little to contribute. You might also find yourself self-isolating, leaving those around you wondering how or if they can help you, or you might lash out on your loved ones without cause or reason to. So this can also cause an increase of psychological issues. So it's very common for symptoms of anxiety and depression to co-occur with burnout. You may feel yourself becoming more cynical or resentful of people around you or your employer. And then you can also feel helpless, that you can't do anything to change your situation. You're just stuck like this. So all of these things can make it feel like you have absolutely nothing left to give of yourself. And so there can also be an increased risk of health problems or somatic complaints. So if it does get to this point, those suffering from burnout can experience health complications. The excessive amounts of stress can leave your body vulnerable to illness or disease even. So fatigue, headaches, insomnia, stomach problems, pain, those are all things that can be common complaints from excessive stress. Those who respond to excessive stress by self-medicating also open the door to all the other host of issues that drugs and alcohol can have on your body. Also, heart disease, high blood pressure, even type 2 diabetes have all been shown as possible outcomes for this chronic excessive stress. And so now, of course, the impact on your job performance. How does burnout or these other work stressors impact your job? So there can be a noticed reduction in your job performance. So of course, feeling cynical and miserable at your job is going to impact your work as well. Burnout can impact your job performance, like missing deadlines, maybe procrastinating on getting certain tasks done, or just disengaging from coworkers or the communication going on in the office, which can cause a reduction in job performance. So it can also increase on the job mistakes. So the increase of distractibility or issues concentrating can increase on the job mistakes. Lack of sleep can also increase these mistakes. And if the employees have low morale or believe that their work doesn't matter or it won't make a difference, this can produce haphazard mistakes or just carelessness in projects or reports. And so professional life, the last one is going to be a decrease in morale. So burnout specifically speaks to a larger organizational issue going on within the culture or the supervisor staff. So if there is a pattern of ignoring employee concerns, overloading work on employees, or constricting employee autonomy, so basically a toxic work environment, this can decrease morale in staff. It can cause them to believe that they don't matter or that they're not valued as employees. So this decrease in morale is dangerous to an organization. It can produce an increase of turnover rates as well as on-the-job mistakes or employees not performing at their optimal. So some things, though, are not easily avoidable. Like I said, the nature of the work. So we can't control what the client is going to bring to us. We can't control what the client issues are going to be. So as helping professionals, we really never know what their story may entail. So the potential impact of compassion fatigue or secondary traumatic stress can be mitigated by a supportive, trauma-informed supervisory staff that is aware of these issues when they pop up and aware that this is a risk of the job and the nature of the work, and they prioritize taking proactive steps to combat it in their organization. So, all right, so how can we take steps to protect ourselves from things like compassion fatigue then, or the secondary traumatic stress? So now we're going to turn the presentation to my supervisor, Kasey Wolff, and she is going to discuss more on that topic.
All righty. Thank you so much, Megan. Okay. So I just kind of want to take some time. Megan provided y'all with like a lot of information and, some background information on secondary traumatic stress, compassion fatigue, and burnout. It's one thing to have a bunch of knowledge, but then once you have the knowledge, what do you do with that? Like, how can you fix this? How can you prevent this? How can you remedy this? And so I'm going to kind of walk through some things that you as individuals can do to kind of help with this. As Megan said, we don't have control over what our clients bring to us in session. I know a bunch of you are attorneys here, so you don't know like what type of stories you're going to hear during the day. And so that part of the job is out of our control, but what is in our control and what can we do to kind of help mitigate the impact of these difficult things that we're hearing day in and day out. So I'm going to go ahead and walk through some of that with y'all. So there are some initial steps that you can take to kind of help with secondary trauma, compassion fatigue, and burnout. And all three of those, secondary trauma, compassion fatigue, and burnout, have like overlap in them. And so there's very much like overlap in some of the things I'm going to talk about with you today, because they're all kind of intertwined together. And so I'm just going to kind of walk through some of these like initial steps for y'all. But the first thing, and so as y'all heard, like in the introduction, I am a therapist. And so one of the first things that I usually do like with clients is in sessions is let them know or ask them, one of the first things, steps in preventing something is to be able to notice what's happening and identify what's happening. And so a lot of times you're going to experience trauma, fatigue, burnout in your body. And so the first step is paying attention to your body. What is your body telling you? Because a lot of times your body is going to be telling you what's going on before your brain is going to catch up. Happens to me, happens to like pretty much everybody I know, all of like the clients that I see. And so checking in with your body, because your body is, a miraculous thing. So paying attention to what you're feeling, being aware of like what your body is experiencing. That way you can implement strategies in order to kind of mitigate and help prevent like the stress that you're experiencing. So a lot of times, and I'll like do this in sessions as well, my clients will, I do an exercise called progressive muscle relaxation with them. And usually you just kind of work through like your muscle groups, like tensing them and relaxing them. And almost everybody is going to carry like some sort of stress in their shoulders, and like they're not really even going to realize that they're doing it. So a lot of people are kind of like hunched up because like on edge, because we're just, hearing all of this difficult stuff. We're overwhelmed. We, are having a hard time kind of balancing like work and, all of the pressures that is taking on us. And so, usually we kind of tense up because we're going into like I need to like be prepared and on edge, and like Megan was saying, like hyper vigilant with everything that's going on. And so checking in with your body and just like noticing different areas of your body that you might be feeling like particularly tense. So I might ask y'all right now to just kind of like pay attention to like what your shoulders are feeling like did you like just notice after I was like talking about that you're like, oh, I am kind of tense in my shoulders right now and my back, and I'm like in this like let's go position. If not, then you're really good at relaxing, and I'm very impressed. And anyway, so paying attention to your body. And, it goes more like if you're noticing that you may have touched on this, but are just feeling exhausted all the time or having difficulty sleeping, you're irritable, angry, like anxious, like you might be getting like headaches from like the stress that you're experiencing. Weight loss is also another one. So just checking in, and this kind of is the next step, just checking in with yourself, and maybe like scheduling a time to check in with yourself, and setting some time aside like every week, every day. If, I know that everybody's pretty busy, but checking in with yourself and scheduling some time to check in with yourself to really notice what you're feeling and what you're experiencing and maybe what your body is trying to tell you. So paying attention to the signs that like Megan has touched on, what your body is telling you, and scheduling some time to check in with yourself. And the check-ins can also be something like journaling too, writing down just kind of what's going on and just letting whatever like stress you're experiencing out and kind of flow through you with pen and paper, or, these days your smartphone works too. And so also, so in addition to noticing what's happening in your body, checking in with yourself often, it's important to establish kind of, if you're able, and I know that this is kind of like a tricky one, and as Megan touched on, like sometimes it's like an organizational wide issue, but doing your part to kind of try to foster and create a workplace that is like open and non-judgmental. I'm sure like most of you, like for me, I'm at the Alliance. And so pretty much, so everybody that I work with like is having kind of like similar experiences, and like they know like the toll that like working with the clients can take because of the things that we're hearing are really difficult. But establishing kind of like open communication as an employee, being able to identify if you're noticing signs of secondary trauma, compassion fatigue, burnout, and communicating that with your supervisor. Because I know a lot of times, like as an employee, like in this field, you just feel like the weight of the world is on your shoulders and you just want to fix all of the problems and solve everything, have solutions. And, it's kind of hard to turn off, which is why scheduling times to kind of check in with yourself comes into play, so that you give yourself the chance to see how you really are. And then if you're noticing that something is off, like communicate that with your supervisors, and asking for what you need, whether that is like time off, a mental health day, and having like as a supervisor and an employee, like having like the expectation that like if somebody is like not working it off, like they're off. And I know like for me, like with my team, like if anybody like takes PTO, I'm like, okay, like turn off all the notifications on your phone. Like I want you to like have the time that you need to kind of get with yourself, reset, refill, do the things that fill you up, because I know that if you're not getting that, then it's going to impact you in the workplace and through your job. And so just really kind of want to encourage, that openness and communication and understanding too, because I know like if you're part of a team and you're all working like similar jobs with like challenging cases that can just be like hard to hear and will take its toll on you. It's important to kind of have that understanding and like open communication as a team and amongst each other, to do what you can to support one another, because it's not easy. So if you, so kind of doing your part to, and do your best. And I know each work's environment and situation is different. And so I just kind of want to encourage, doing what you can in approaching that. Because like in the long run, like the positive interactions like in the workplace, and if you're feeling like supported in the workplace, then it's going to have like a positive impact on everybody's mental and emotional health. And I couldn't tell you like the number of times that I've like friends, not necessarily like in this field, but have just had really like toxic work environments where they're expected, even when they're off, like to be on and responding to emails all the time. It's just not healthy. And so having like that work-life balance, which kind of leads me into my next thing, is upholding your boundaries. Well, first creating boundaries and knowing what your boundaries are and communicating them up front. And this goes for in the workplace as well as with clients. So usually I suggest having clear boundaries like with your clients, like from the get-go. I let my clients know like, hey, like, when I like, if it's like after hours, like I give them like resources because like a therapist, you know, like emergencies like do happen. And so they need to know who to call in case of emergency. So I make sure that I provide them the resources that would be available if I'm not available, and just making it clear with them that when you're like not on the clock or like working in the case, like you need to take time for yourself because your needs are super valid as well. And your emotional needs are valid and important. And it's important that you're paying attention to those in order to kind of prevent all of this burnout, compassion fatigue, secondary traumatic stress. So identifying, naming, and upholding your boundaries. That can definitely take some practice, especially if you don't do that often. It's a little weird to do at first if you're not super comfortable with it. And I totally get that. And I would just encourage you to be patient with yourself and, you know, kind and give yourself some grace, because as with anything, if you're trying something new, it might take a little bit of time to get the hang of it and, you know, get kind of in a place where you get like more comfortable exerting your boundaries and like upholding your boundaries. Yeah, so boundaries important, and finding that balance of like caring for your clients as well as caring for yourself. And I know that that's sometimes like tricky to do, but and it might take some trial and error to kind of get to a place that you feel comfortable with. But, you know, I know all of you work super hard and do everything that you can like for your clients and like doing your best to help them and assist them in every way that you need. And so sometimes it's hard to like turn off from that and like, oh, like, what if there's like one more thing that I can do to like help them? Or if I just like spend a little bit more time like researching this one thing to try to find them like this resource, you know, that can take its toll on you. And so, and this again also takes like a little bit of time, but just trusting that you have provided your clients like with the resources that they need and are doing like what you can with them and their cases in session, like, you know, if you're an attorney and touching base with them and like their case, you know, you're doing what you can to help them, and just kind of like reminding yourself of that and trusting that, you know, you are doing your best and like doing what you can. Because it's also important that you pour into yourself. You know, the old saying, like, you can't pour from an empty cup. So if you're just pouring out to everybody else, then you're going to not have anything if you're not refilling your cup and kind of giving yourself what you need. And so this next piece kind of is what developing like a self-care routine can come into play. So if you want to go to the next slide, Megan. Yeah, so as I mentioned kind of before, part of self-care is having boundaries. You know, I don't know about y'all, but when I see those little red like numbers at the top of my email, it stresses me out and I don't like to see it. And like, honestly, just seeing it, even if I'm like not like going to check it, like makes me anxious because I feel like I need to go and check it and see what's happening and see if there's something else that I can do. So if you're able, just like turning those off, you know, and so it's not kind of like that constant red number. Like I kind of see it here, like with the Q&A, I haven't looked at the Q&A yet, sorry, but like that number 3, like, oh, those are unopened things that I need to attend to and address, you know, will take its toll on you if you're just kind of like worried about like what it is that's going on. So just kind of like encourage you to kind of figure out work boundaries and like that work-life balance that works for you. And then next, and this is super important, identifying your own support network. So who are the people in your life that you can count on? Who are the people in your life that, you know, will support you? So having like a community, whether that's like at work with your team, and you know, some of us are like lucky enough to have a team where we feel supported and encouraged and cared about. So even if it's not at work, identifying who your support network is outside of work, who you can count on and rely on and like turn to if you're just really like having a hard time. Who is it that you can turn to for support if you need it? That one's like a big important one because, you know, I think sometimes we can feel like we're alone in like what we're doing, and like we're trying to like be like superwoman, superman for like the clients that come into our offices. And sometimes we might feel alone, like I'm the only person that can like help this person. And so trying like feeling kind of like that pressure and feeling like alone in that. So being able to identify who your support network is and who you can count on and rely on is super important. To just kind of share the burden and share the load, because, you know, the more people that are caring or helping you out, then, you know, the less daunting it is. And I think we a lot of times want to feel like we can just shoulder everything, but, you know, over time that is going to have a significant impact on our well-being and will eventually like grind us down. So being able to identify who your support network is and who your people are. And then the next, you know, just general like healthy habits, right? So like a balanced diet and exercise, getting moving in your body can be like super helpful, even if you're just like standing up to like shake it out a little bit. Like if you've been like hunched over your computer, like responding to emails, you know, just taking a second to move your body and just kind of like, you know, because as I mentioned before, like your body kind of is going to hold on to like a lot of like the stress that you're feeling and experiencing. So moving and kind of like addressing that and like shaking it out can kind of be helpful. And I mean, obviously like actual exercise, like going for like a run or a walk or a bike ride or, you know, something like that. It's springtime. The weather is somewhat nice right now. Like take advantage of it before it gets the blistering hot summer temperatures. But yeah, so just taking care of like our body and like filling it with what it needs, and getting it moving and kind of shaking can help with you know, boosting our own mood. So important things. And then also like a regular sleep schedule. I know it's tempting to like lay in bed and like scroll on your phone, and then you get like sucked into Instagram or Netflix or whatever it is. And suddenly it's like 2 o'clock in the morning and you're like, what happened? Where did the time go? So being kind of diligent about like a sleep schedule and routine can just kind of get your body like set into like a place where like okay, my body knows that it's time to go to bed at this time. And, it sometimes takes a bit to kind of develop that habit and routine. But once you're kind of in it, then your body's like, all right, it's like 9 o'clock, it's bedtime. And I usually kind of recommend like not looking at like screens for like the hour leading up to bed, and just kind of like taking some time to like unwind and, let your body kind of come down from like the glowing devices and things like that. So getting in like a regular sleep schedule. Also honoring your emotional needs as they arise. I know that it's tempting to just be like, oh, I'm too busy. Like, I don't have time to address this. I have like clients that I have like more important things that are like going on that I need to like solve and fix and attend to. And like my emotional needs like come second to that. Like they're fine. Like they're not as like big, and so I'm just gonna like shove it down and not address it. That's actually gonna have like the opposite effect that you want it to. Like shoving it down and like setting it aside doesn't really do any good, because eventually it'll just kind of like seep back up later down the road when you're not expecting it sometimes. So when you're noticing like emotional needs arise, honoring that, experiencing those feelings, paying attention to what they are, just kind of like sitting in that for a minute. If you need to like cry, like crying it out can be a very cathartic experience. But honoring the emotional needs that arise is important, because your needs and emotions are valid and important, and they're worth paying attention to. And then, of course, practicing positive coping strategies. I know Megan kind of touched on some negative coping strategies, like turning to like alcohol, smoking, drugs, like these kinds of things. So really focusing on the strategy, the positive, the strategies, the coping strategies that are positive. So whether that be working out, if you have like a hobby or something that you're really interested in, taking some time to do that, taking some time to draw, listen to music, like have a dance party with yourself, things that fill you up and are, have a positive impact on your well-being, because I know it can be tempting to kind of turn to like the easy things of like, oh, well, I'll maybe just like have a glass of wine and like watch Netflix, and not to say there's anything wrong with that, but just being aware of like the coping strategies that you are turning to, and making sure that in the long run they are going to have like the positive impact that you want them to, instead of turning into something else like Megan was kind of mentioning earlier. Yep. And then finally, seek outside help. If you are at a loss and don't really know what to do, don't know where to turn to, work isn't like helping you, like your friends are, or family, or your support network like doesn't really know like what to do, or you just kind of like feel at a loss and don't know what to do, seek help outside, like counseling services. There is no shame in therapy, and just like going to therapy does not mean that you're crazy or something is wrong with you. It's kind of like going to the doctor. You just want to kind of like check in sometimes and make sure that things are like tuned well and as they need to be. And so seeking outside help, there's like no shame in that. And, I definitely like encourage that, especially like in the types of work environments that we're in, where we're experiencing a lot of difficult stuff all the time. I recommend to like at least everybody that I've encountered, like my team and stuff, I encourage them to seek therapy outside, just to make sure that they are getting like the professional help that they need or require, that might not be able to be addressed in the work environment or like in their home life, external environment. So counseling, and then also like psychiatric services. Sometimes, combination of the two is going to be what works best. So I just would want to encourage all of y'all to seek outside help, even if you don't need it, for resources. Psychology Today is a great place to find a counselor that would take your insurance if you want to do the insurance route. But there are a bunch of resources out there, like the list is endless. So I would just encourage you to seek counseling if you feel necessary. So any questions? Actually, I guess there's a Q&A thing. Let's see.
Yes, there's a few questions. Can you see them, Kasey?
Yes.
I answer a few,
yes.
But there's a few that I didn't get to.
Okay. Let me see. Come on. So I guess I'll kind of go. So the exercise, if you type progressive muscle relaxation, there are usually like YouTube videos, and there are like a million different like variations to that. So the one I kind of do, I usually start at like the toes and work up to the head and just kind of tense the muscle, notice what that feels like, and then release it, and then just kind of let it melt, kind of like you're like melting in the chair. But there are YouTube videos on that. If you search progressive muscle relaxation, I would totally walk y'all through it, but I'm trying to be mindful of all of the time. Let's see. Even after. Yeah, so a little tricky. So I don't know if y'all can see them, but the question that is here, any recommendations if supervising roles are not supportive, even after we are transparent on burnout levels? Yeah, so that's kind of tricky, and that might incorporate a couple of different routes. I don't know like this specific situation, but maybe, I don't know if you've like spoken to like management and just like made a note that it would be important to have like some sort of like check-in like with employees, or some asking for organizational level like support groups, or some sort of like check-in, like staff check-in or something like that. And then I would also maybe recommend, this might be where like some of like the boundaries kind of like come into play, where you get to a point where you might have to say no to adding something on your plate if your plate is full, and like you just simply like, there is a limit to like how much work we can do, and like how much we can like take on, and there's only so much time in the day. And so that kind of might be a situation where implementing some of your own like personal boundaries come into play. Again, don't know like the specifics of everything. And then also, as I said, seeking outside like resources and therapy, and making sure that you are kind of taking time for yourself, like in therapy, and maybe walking through that like with a professional to kind of help with that. And then do you have any tools to come back from compassion fatigue when taking significant time is not an option? Yeah, so again, I know that's like kind of like a hard situation to be in if you're not able to take like significant time. The best thing I can do is kind of do everything in your power to like establish that like work-life balance, and making sure that you're taking at least like small time throughout the day to fill yourself up with like whatever it is you need. Just kind of being aware, and kind of like what I was speaking to earlier, like paying attention to what's going on and identify what you might need. Like sometimes that might be a long, like, or like a 15-minute break, like during the workday. Like I know that that's kind of hard, but I'm pretty sure that you're like, you have to be given like at least like a small break during the day. So like taking little moments when whenever you're able to do things that fill you up, and establishing and developing like a self-care routine. So I'm not sure like when these questions came up, and so I don't know like what point in the presentation was, so I'm not sure if I addressed some of these beforehand, but
yes, and it's okay, Kasey, we don't get to all the questions. I'm gonna keep record of every question and go over it, and if we did not answer, we'll provide those answers at a later time.
Okay,
is that okay?
Yeah, I think that was well, I'm not sure if this well, I don't know what, as far as like time goes. I know it's a little after 3, so
yeah, it's hard to follow right now the questions, but just to be conscious of time, we'll go ahead and get moving, and we could provide answers to any question that we might have missed. Is that okay?
Yeah,
perfect.
That works for me.
Thank you.
But thank you all. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you, Kasey and Megan, for such a great presentation. Just a quick reminders, following the webinar, we're gonna be providing a survey for feedback and a survey for credit for CEUs and a letter of attendance. So if you're needing that, please don't forget to fill out the survey. Okay, I wanted to briefly share just a few of our resources that we have posted on our website. We have many others, so please visit our website for those. Thank you. Okay, we are on social media, so please follow us. You could scan the QR codes to follow us in the different social platforms. Thank you. And lastly, but not least, I want to thank everybody for supporting this webinar. But most importantly, I want to thank you for supporting yourself by attending this webinar. And thank you. We're going to be providing copies of the PowerPoints as mentioned at the beginning at a later time. And yeah, if you guys have any questions, you could always contact me directly. Thank you.